Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Digital Frontier, Mitigating Cybersecurity Risks for Travel Agency Owners. As the travel industry becomes increasingly digitized, travel agency owners face growing challenges in protecting sensitive customer data and maintaining trust in the evolving threat landscape. Cybersecurity is no longer a back office function, it's a critical business imperative. This webinar is designed to equip you with the knowledge and tools to identify risks, respond to fraud, and strengthen your agency's digital defenses. But before we dig into all of this, there's some quick housekeeping that I would like to do. Just for everybody's knowledge, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it out on ARC's website for future reference. We also ask that you engage with us during this webinar by asking questions via the question toolbar on the screen. You should be able to find it at the top of your screen and just look up for the question toolbar, and please submit your questions to us via that format. We'll be monitoring that as we go forward. So for introductions, my name is Cornelius Hattingh. I'm the Director of Revenue Integrity at ARC. And with me today are two of my colleagues, and I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves. Kevin, if you want to take the lead.
Hey, Cornelius, thank you. Yes, Kevin Haag, Manager of Payment Processing Acceptance with ARC. I work with Jennifer Watkins. My role here is really working with the GDSs, acquirers, the card brands, the airlines, the agencies on payment acceptance, and really more focused on the data, which we'll be touching on throughout the presentation.
All right. Hi, my name is Keith Miles. I'm the Senior Manager for Security Assurance here at ARC. I've been here just over 2 years, but about 15 years altogether in the security and privacy industry. And my role is working with our CISO to maintain information security and privacy aspects of our ARC systems and applications.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. So today's agenda will guide us through a high-level credit card authorization and settlement flow, touching on some fraud trends to gain some insights into the latest fraud tactics targeting the travel sector and how bad actors are exploiting vulnerabilities in digital environments and beyond. We'll also touch on chargeback and chargeback management, and we will also just give you a quick rundown of some resources that's available to you to help mitigate against fraud and associated risks in the industry. So whether you are looking to improve your security posture or proactively prevent future threats, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Cornelius. So we're going to start out with talking about the payment card authorization process and why is this important. I think Cornelius alluded to this in his opening remarks, is that more and more transactions are moving digital, online, mobile devices. And with that, there's the higher risk of fraud and security issues. So from an authorization perspective, why is this important that we handle the authorization process correctly? And as I alluded to earlier, it comes down to data and how that data is handled and what's contained in that authorization process. So what we have on the screen here is a couple of different flows. I'm going to go through at a high level. The first flow is what I would call the standard flow, where the airline is the record of merchant. The merchant of record. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, merchant of record is where the merchant is financially responsible for the transaction. So they're the ones that will get the chargeback, and they are also the ones that will receive the funding. So in the first flow that I'm going to run through, that's the one that we see most often from an ARC perspective. That's where the agent is acting as an agent for the airline, and the airline is the merchant of record. So we start out with the customer. They, of course, are going to interact with the agency via the web app or mobile, or maybe even some rare cases, you can talk to the agent on phone. So as part of that process, the application and or agent is going to collect information relating to that transaction, customer information, name, address, itinerary information, and payment information. So that information then will get bundled up, and if we follow the upper arrow, sent off to the GDSs via a message route in the application. The GDSs will then take that information. They will bundle that information up in what we call an authorization request message. So there is a lot of data associated with that authorization request. It will be sent over to the card brand networks. So the card brand networks here really play the role of a distributor. There's over 12,000 banks and credit unions out there now. Not all of them issue credit cards, but there's no way that any one endpoint can access all those card brands, or I'm sorry, all those issuers. So the data going to the card brand, they will then have those connections and take that authorization request message and send it out to the issuer. The issuer will then go ahead and validate that information, run through their risk models, take a look at what that transaction represents. They will hopefully approve that transaction. They will add some addendum information, and that addendum information is really based on by card brand, whether it's a Visa or MasterCard. There's various data elements that the issuer will append back to that authorization request message and send that data back in the authorization response. Of course, that response will then go back to the card brands. The card brands will then send that back to the appropriate GDS. The GDS will capture that approval code and the additional data elements that the issuer has appended to that authorization response message. And then, of course, from that point on, they'll go ahead and send that information or that confirmation back to the travel agency, who can then, share that information with the customer. So some of the keys here are authorization, and per the Section 6 of the Industry Agent Handbook, authorization should take place at the time of ticketing. So I know there's a couple different models out there that agencies use, but we really emphasize as the best practice to authorize at the time of ticketing, because that's when the data is going to be final. You're going to know the itinerary, you're going to know the cost, you're going to have everything at a final stage. And so the information that flows all the way to the issuer is going to be the best information. So at a high level, that's the basic flow. So go ahead, Cornelius. So then I also just want to talk a little bit about 3DS. And so from a 3DS perspective, that is just really customer authentication. And that's really an additional layer of security that can be added to the transaction. And in the digital world, a lot of other industries or markets have what they call 3DS, and it's used fairly regularly. From an art perspective, 3DS is really limited. I think we have maybe about a dozen or fewer agencies that are using 3DS, and we're seeing very little volume coming through 3DS as an overall part of transactions. So you may be familiar with some of the terms that you hear from the brands, like SafeKey, which is an American Express product. Protect By is the Discover's 3DS product. Secure Code is MasterCard's, and Visa Secure, of course, is the Visa product. And so really, in order to leverage the 3DS, you would end up working with a third-party provider, somebody like Cardinal Commerce or maybe a CyberSource, and your GDS in order to identify what's needed. As part of that process, you make a call out to the third-party provider. They'll authenticate the customer. They'll provide some data back that will then be included into the authorization request message that goes out to the GDS, and that flow will then go through as previously described. So again, from a 3DS perspective, not seeing a lot of volume, a good opportunity, maybe a good fit for some of the agencies out there, but that's really something that you need to look into. And then if it is an avenue you want to pursue, you'd start that conversation probably with the GDSs you're using, and maybe look at third-party providers. So with that, I'll just.
That's good advice, Kevin.
Thank you, Cornelius. And with that, I'll just briefly talk. I mean, we talked about the NDC channel, the carrier channel. That's the blue arrow. Of course, there again, you the agency have that app or that connection with the carrier for those NDC transactions. They're going to send that transaction out through their payment processor, which will be a similar flow as to what I just ran through. Only it will be through the carrier versus through the GDS. And then if we go down one more time, Cornelius, and see the acquirer, the agency flow as the acquirer. And so in this case, the agency, some agencies out there are big enough, they have their own merchant account with an acquirer. They are the own merchant of record. And in those cases, those transactions would go out to the acquirer, and the acquirer would then run through that similar authorization process that I just described. And then, of course, all this information is wrapped with PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. And that is really a security envelope and talks about how payment information should be handled when in transit or storage, encryption standards. It really has 12 pillars about how that data should be handled when moving. So we could probably spend another hour or two on payment security using 3D or PCI DSS, but that would be another session.
Yeah,
so with that,
absolutely. So Kevin, we got a question in. Are there tools such as DocuSign that are recommended to capture client information at the front end of a transaction, including credit cards for non-GDS agents?
For non-GDS agents, yeah, I mean, in general, when you're looking at how you're handling the transaction information you're capturing, if that is something that you can leverage and use, that documentation may be something that you could provide during a chargeback. They would say compelling evidence, and we'll touch a little bit more on later on down the road. So from that perspective, it may be handy. As you identified, or as the question identified, it was outside of the GDS flow. But any tools that you have that you can further enforce or show the participation of a client in a transaction is probably going to help you at some point down the road.
And T's and C's, terms and conditions, validating your terms and conditions with the customer as well, right, Kevin? And then obviously getting them to confirm that they made the payment and they signed up for the throat, etc.
Yes, yep. And we'll touch a little bit on those a little later on under chargeback management, but good point.
Yeah.
Cornelius.
Thank you. All right.
So now we're going to jump to the settlement process. And again, the settlement process is key part of the data flow. We just walked through the front end authorization process at a high level. So what happens at the end of the day, early the next morning, the GDSs will bundle up their ticketed transactions and send those transactions to ARC. ARC will then take that data and we'll go ahead and create what we call a credit card billing file. And that credit card billing file will have the ticketing information, the customer information, the payment information, and the additional data provided by the issuing bank back to the GDS, who has now provided that information to ARC. ARC will go ahead and take that credit card billing file and we'll send it out to processors and acquirers around the world. We work with approximately 15 plus acquirers and processors around the world. And I'm just going to stop a minute and talk a little bit about the difference between an acquirer and a processor. An acquirer is somebody who has the relationship with MasterCard and Visa, and they are really responsible for that transaction and that interaction with the brands. And the acquirer really, again, then also has the relationship with the carrier or airline, and or if you have, as an agency, your own merchant account would have that relationship with the merchant. A processor similar to what it sounds like. That is a entity that ARC would pass the file to. They may do some enhancement of the data for the airline. They may make some changes, or they may help load that information into an airline's revenue accounting system. But for the most part, they don't have a relationship directly with the card brand. You do have some processors that are acquirers as well, so they may play a dual role. But I just wanted to let the agency group know what the difference is between acquirer and a processor. ARC also would send, in the case of American Express or Discover, we would send our credit card billing file directly to those entities to be addressed. Again, the card brands, their role here is more as a distributor. They're going to take that data from the clearing or the credit card file, and they're going to send it out to the various issuers. The issuers are going to take that file. They're going to validate the information on it. They're probably going to bounce it up against their authorization systems to see that the data that we pass them is within their systems. And so that goes back to the key of authorizing those transactions at the time of ticketing through a GDS. So that data does flow to the issuer. And the issuer will then say, yep, I have a valid transaction. Everything looks good. I'm going to fund the transaction back to the card brands. The card brands will then fund back to the acquirers. They don't fund back to the processors. They'll fund back to the acquirers. And then the acquirers will go ahead and pay the carriers. So from a high level, that's the process. And again, the settlement process is still wrapped by some of those guidelines of PCI DSS and how that data should be secured and handled. Well, unless there are any questions,
no additional questions at the moment. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, so with that background, we can see on this slide where the vulnerabilities are and identify the areas your agency has responsibility over. From the beginning, you need to be vetting the card used for purchase and the customer. Managing your online, you also have to manage your online presence, such as your web pages, email, and social media, and protecting all your credentials for those transactions and the environments associated with those transactions, all the way through to the GDS environment. So let's, with this as the background, let's take a look at the type of fraud, trends, and threats we've identified in these areas. Okay, so it's no longer just phishing that's a concern. AI is changing the game, and cyber criminals are getting smarter and more convincing. It's not just suspicious emails or dodgy links anymore. Now they're using AI and deepfake technology to create shockingly realistic audio and video messages. These aren't strangers trying to scam you, posing as people you know and trust. And don't think small or mid-sized agencies are flying under the radar. In fact, you're unfortunately most likely to be targeted because of the perception that your defenses might not be as strong. That is why multi-factor authentication and having a solid incident response plan aren't just nice to haves anymore. They are essential in these environments. Phishing might not make headlines anymore from an ARC perspective, but make no mistake, it's happening every day. We get GDS notifications sent to ARC, reporting of attempts to breach environments, of new websites, cloned sites, making and looking to feel like a GDS site. So those threats are still real, they're still out there, but through the multi-factor authentication implementation in the past year or so, those threats have really reduced down, but they are still front and center as a concern to the industry. Every time we do get notified from the GDSs of a new change or a significant alteration to what the messaging looks like, we do send out notices to the agency community via our TAC messages. So if you're not part of those TAC messages, please go ahead and sign up for those via our website. Next, baiting the ambitious. Business scams on the rise. You've heard it before. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That saying is more relevant than ever. We're seeing a wave of fraud targeting agencies looking to grow. Fake affiliate programs, exciting expansion offers, and investment scams are designed to catch owners chasing new opportunities. One big red flag in this space is that if any offer that pushes urgency and vague promises are to be avoided. If someone's rushing you to make a decision or glossing over details, pause and ask yourself the questions. Is this the right fit for you? If it's not, walk away. Unfortunately, we've had a very recent incident, real world example, where ARC's risk team dealt with a heartbreaking case. A longtime agency nearing retirement was approached by someone who offered to partner and pay the agency $5 per domestic ticket and $10 per international ticket if they were allowed to use the registered ARC accredited agency's environment. The agent trusted them and handed over access. Within days, that partner had issued over $1 million in tickets and vanished. The agent, in this instance, was left holding the bag, and we're still dealing with that fallout. So it's essential that if you do get approached or see business opportunities through other channels, that you really do some proper vetting of who you're doing business with. Payment fraud still very much alive, and hence the review that we did with Kevin. Fraud isn't just about stolen cards, it's also first-party fraud, chargebacks coming through. So again, ensuring that you get all the information you need and validate your customer and validate payment, the form of payment as being legitimate is key. And that's why ARC actively monitors this environment as well. And flag any risks that we see to the agency community through our risk alerts. So if you get a risk alert from ARC, please don't ignore it. It means something is suspicious and it's real. And we need your help to stop it before it spreads. So we do have a very active team that looks at transactions on a daily basis. And as you know, in order to take any corrective action, you need to do it within a 24-hour window. So if you do get an alert from us, time is running out, and we need you really to respond to those notifications, especially in this card not present environment that we're operating in. New threats that we see around the NDC channel, it's really more sort of posing as legitimate agencies in this environment. So again, it is a concern for the airlines in their vetting process and onboarding procedures, but it's also your responsibility to protect your credentials and ensure that things that associates with your agency, such as your ARC number or IATA number, is safeguarded. Don't post it on your website. People can scrape that and use it in an application. So it's essential that you as an agency secure those environments as well. So it's not just a responsibility of the airlines there. We also see ghost entities and misused accreditation to this in this space. So again, that ARC accreditation is a stamp of trust, and fraudsters are abusing it. They're pretending to be real agencies, running bookings through legit agents to stay hidden, and then setting up fake websites and social accounts. The damage, it hits your reputation and obviously your business downstream. Another fraud that we've been seeing is around invoices. Invoice fraud is sneakier than ever. These scams are designed to look like part of a normal email thread, and it would appear that you've had communication with the person before. These are normally include phony attachments, requests to update payment information, and pressure you to act quickly. So the golden rule in these environments is always confirm financial requests through a second trusted channel. And as mentioned earlier as well, vetting of who you're doing business with. Every new connection to your system is a potential risk. That includes sub-agencies, affiliate partners, and technology vendors. If you're not doing proper vetting or leaving old access points open, you're creating easy entry points for attackers. Implement a clear onboarding checklist and regular cleanup of dormant accounts. And this is just a short list of reasons why ARC has made changes to the Section B of the ARA, which we'll get into now. I'm just going to look at if there's any questions, or Keith or Kevin, you want to add anything?
No, I think you did a good job covering this slide well, detailing examples of the types of threat vectors we see in the industry. Next few slides, we'll take a look at some of the detective and preventive mechanisms to combat these trends.
So again, just some questions out there. Yes, we will share these slides with everyone. It'll be on our, Judy, I think you're going to share it out with participants, but we'll also post it on our website.
Yes, Cornelius, that is correct. It'll be sent out to anyone that registered and attended, and on our arccorp.com on-demand webinars section. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you for that. So as travel agencies issue and manage ARC traffic documents in electronic format, the responsibility for protecting that data rests directly on you, the agent. And let's be clear, this isn't just best practice. It's a contractual obligation under the ARC agreement. To help you stay ahead in today's rapidly evolving fraud landscape, ARC has recently enhanced the Section B of the agreement. This section spells out what's expected in terms of security, specifically what qualifies as reasonable care. But before we dive into the details, let's pause and ask first, what exactly is reasonable care? Put simply, reasonable care means taking active steps to protect your business. That includes putting the right physical controls in place, using secure electronic systems, having strong management procedures, providing staff training, and implementing proper technology and processes. All of this is aimed at preventing unauthorized access, disclosure, changes, or destruction of ARC traffic documents and transactional data. This isn't just a recommendation, it's the baseline standard, and meeting it is a critical part of protecting your agency, your customers, and your reputation. So handing over to Keith here to break these requirements down in a little bit more detail.
Sure. Thanks, Cornelius. So I'm going to run through these 10 reasonable care measures, and these controls are a baseline of foundational security practices for establishing a security program. And there's no need to stop here, right? You should feel empowered to build on this as you develop and mature your security program. One quick disclaimer, there are a breadth of solutions available based on the size of scope of your agency. And each agency should evaluate their risk and the cost benefit when selecting and implementing solutions that make sense for your organization. Not to say that any of these are optional, it's just how you address them, where it may take some effort to identify what that best fit solution is for your organization. So the first one we have here is unique IDs. Each person who has access to cardholder data should be assigned a unique ID. So this allows you to track and monitor individual access to data and helps in identifying any unauthorized access or suspicious activity within your system, right? Each action taken on a system needs to be attributed to an accountable individual for auditing and integrity. And of course, do not share accounts, right? Strong do not there.
Yep.
Part 2 is strong passwords. Passwords are the keys to your account. If these are compromised, you've now lost control of that account. The stronger the password, the harder to guess. So we recommend using passphrases or password managers to generate more complex passwords. Bullet point 3, you've heard about MFA, I'm sure, in the past, and we'll continue to emphasize the use of MFA, right? So implementing MFA addresses the inherent weaknesses we have with password-based authentication. It adds a second factor, either something you have or something you are, to the already known something which is the password, right? So even if your password is stolen, with good MFA practices, that prevents the use of that password, further protecting your account. Bullet 4, we've got the control around device usage. Agents should strive for limiting device usage strictly for business use and keep those devices updated, both operating system and necessary applications. Track what's installed on the machine, who has access to the machine, and what activities those devices are used for. Bullet point 5, here we're looking for tools such as antivirus and firewall, right? So a strong antivirus solution thwarts the majority of virus infections through malicious links, attachments, malicious sites, etc. But with the use of static signature monitoring. So it's comparing vulnerabilities and ransomware and malicious attachments against known signatures. So it'll prevent those as long as you have that enabled, right? We're looking for a robust solution there. Local network firewalls further protect activities at the network layer, protecting you from malicious network traffic, so navigating to malicious sites. The next bullet point, we're talking about spam, phishing emails, filters, and training. Email filters for spam and phishing catch a lot of junk emails if you're using a reputable email client. Because it catches a lot means it doesn't catch everything. And this is where training comes into play. Users should seek out and attend regular trainings for recognizing phishing. And you can take this to the next level, maturing your program by developing and incorporating reporting processes, right? So you have further awareness across your organization. Next is encryption. So encryption protects data in transit and at rest. If you don't have strong encryption methods implemented, data can be captured on unsecured networks, stolen in transit, or if a device is ever lost or stolen. Most devices and modern operating systems have a native method for enabling encryption. So your Windows, your Mac machines have native encryption applications, as well as your iOS and Android devices. Security training. And users are the front line of our defenses, right? We can have all the budget and security protections in the world in place. And if a user allows what the system recognizes as a valid account that has now been compromised to enter the stronghold, there are few defenses left to protect systems and data. So we want to make sure, we're constantly evaluating training and awareness and making sure we're updating that with real world use cases. The second to last bullet point here, we're looking at OS patches and automatic updates. As soon as a patch is released, if not sooner, nefarious actors are reverse engineering those updates to identify and weaponize exploits. So monitoring updates, depending on the size of the agency, can be a full-time job in itself. Regardless if you're on Mac or Windows, there are frequent and ongoing vulnerabilities exposed every day. So a quick win here is just to enable automatic updates so that your machines and your servers are getting those updates as fast as they can. And the last bullet point here are browser updates. So just like for your operating system, they require frequent updates, right? They frequently get code updates, and there may be bugs or fixes or security holes that need to be patched. So enabling automatic updates on your browsers is also highly recommended. And most of the browsers today already have this enabled by default.
Yeah, I just want to add here that in order for ARC to determine reasonable care in an environment where you might have been compromised, we do look for all of this. So we have a questionnaire that we will send out to the agency impacted and ask them to provide us with all of this documentation in order for us to determine that reasonable care piece, which obviously plays in your favor. We do have all of these requirements in place and has been validated and vetted by ARC as having been in place at the time of the incident. So it's key and crucial that you have these requirements in place. Keith, we have one question in here. Is there a specific firewall or software recommended to protect your computer data?
It's hard to recommend without a few additional details, right? So depending on, as I mentioned earlier, depending on the size and breadth of your agency, right, there's a number of options available, right? If you're a one laptop agency, again, Windows has Defender built in, Mac has its own antivirus product built in as well. You do have different tiers, again, depending on how many machines you have to manage. There's static AV that I mentioned earlier, or there's you can go even further with like a CrowdStrike, which is more of an EDR and endpoint detection and response module. So it's not just looking at static signatures for vulnerabilities, but it's actually looking at the processes running on your machine. So there's a number of products available, and it's just making sure it fits your agency.
Perfect. I'm just going to pause here for a minute. Just again open this up for questions. So if anybody has additional questions that they want to ask us at this juncture, please go ahead and type those in so we can get on to helping you out there. Just pause here for a minute, see if there's anything coming in. If not, we'll move ahead. And just to add, ARC also requires specific training. So there's two modules that we share out and have agencies train on as a requirement. So you might have seen those as well already, and that's all part of strengthening the cyber environment for everybody and ensuring people have received the necessary training to help protect your agency against cyber threats. There's a question. Do you recommend the additional insurance coverage for cyber issues that is currently excluded from E&O insurance? Keith, is that something you can answer?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to a business decision. I'm not. Again, it's obviously an additional cost as well that you need to take in consideration, and also understand what criteria or limitations there might be in getting that coverage. What are they going to cover? Are they going to cover instances of phishing? Are they I would say if you're considering it, definitely ask a lot of questions and make sure they provide coverage to what you might be exposed to, and evaluate it and make a business decision accordingly.
Yeah, and just to expand on that a little more, I mean, what you're going to see with cyber insurance is just like we have with reasonable care here, right? They're going to look deeply into what you're doing with your systems to make sure you meet some minimum security baseline, right? And they're going to evaluate your systems against that. So just be careful of the language when you're shopping for cyber insurance of exactly what is covered, and if there's any areas where they feel, well, if you didn't meet this minimum threshold of security, well, then we're not going to cover it, right? So there are some not necessarily pitfalls, but just areas to be aware of when shopping for cyber insurance. But it's certainly not a bad option.
Always helpful. And also again, if any ransomware, right? So depending on again size of your operation, you might want to get some protection against ransomware as well. We have seen ransomware cases where travel agencies have been impacted and their back offices have been held, for ransom. And so working with people in that space and with that expertise is always helpful, and having the necessary coverage also is valuable. All right. So with that, we look at some best practices.
Yeah, so we covered some of these points in the reasonable care measures, the slide before. We talked about strong authentication, MFA, cybersecurity tools like antivirus, firewalls, spam and phishing protection. But there's a few extras here that we definitely would like to call out. Policy and preparedness at the agency level would be wise to document your security program via policy, right? Include what is acceptable use, what is not, what are the tailored security requirements for your agency. And around preparedness, Cornelius mentioned earlier, things like malware and ransomware, right? It's smart to have an incident response plan in place, and then also to practice that incident response plan so that you know what actions to take in the event of a breach. Who to report it to, can you recover your systems from backup, right? Also having a backup strategy for your data. Another one's least privilege, only provide the permissions and tools needed for individuals to perform their job, and revoke that access as soon as no longer necessary, right? Reviewing accounts regularly to prevent permissions creep or leaving open access for an individual that's left the organization.
Absolutely. And then just, there's some other options for you as well via your GDS. Obviously, today, most GDSs offer multi-factor authentication, so definitely enable that where that is available. Remove pseudo-cities when you don't use them anymore. If you've provided access to someone at some point in time for one reason or another, and they no longer need that access, immediately close that out. Get that removed from your system. That's an open liability that you can easily take control of. Set least privilege access for users of your GDS environments. Turn off ticketing capabilities during off-hour hours if applicable, and also where that is available through the GDS. Some GDSs also offer no cash form of payment to be turned off. So do ensure you do that as well. If you don't need cash to be processing your transactions, it's definitely recommended to remove that as an option as a form of payment. Historically, that form of payment, cash, was used in many of the phishing scams that we dealt with, and of course that liability sits squarely with the agency because of that cash being the form of payment. So do adhere to some of those changes and work with your GDS to enable some of those and see what else they have on offer to provide security to you. And again, just focusing on that phishing emails, GDSs will never send you a request to click a link in an email. Kevin, you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I mean, from a card acceptance perspective, of course, first knowing your customer, that provides a lot of information right out of the gate. Understanding Section 6 of the Industry Agents Handbook. If you haven't read that, it's always a great refresher. It talks about proper acceptance rules and talks about chargeback management. One of the things I do want to recommend or recognize is the reuse of approval codes. I see that on some of the payment data. We'll see agencies working with the client. They'll have a $900 ticket. The client will make a change. It'll be a $600 ticket. Instead of reauthorizing that transaction, they'll go ahead and use that approval code off the original transaction. And of course, as I explained earlier, there's additional data elements that get passed with the approval code when it's done through the GDS. And so that just is not a good practice to reuse an approval code. Again, always go out, get an approval through the GDS. And then when I talk with card brands and acquirers, even though address verification and card security codes are sort of, I guess, old technology, they've been around for quite a while, they still recommend those as potential fraud prevention solutions. So it might be an easy fix for an agency to go in and work with the GDS to make sure those options are available as potential security, as well as I touched on 3DS Online. Look at it, see if it's worthwhile for your agency, see if there's at a transaction level or the type of transaction that you believe your agency could benefit from that additional authorization or authentication. And again, we have some third parties out there that can help manage that risk as well.
Right, we've got a couple of questions in. Keith, this one for you. What phishing and specific cybersecurity training is best to require of independent contractors?
Yeah, so anything that you're required to take yourself, I would also make your independent contractors required to take. I know we've got our own requirements from an ARC standpoint that all agencies or anyone with ticketing authority, if I'm saying that correctly, Cornelius, are required to take the ARC training. There's plenty of solutions out there. If you want, there's pre-canned LMS systems, learning management systems, like KnowBe4 and PhishMe and things like that have modules for both performing your own phishing campaign tests as well as just awareness and trainings. But you can also check, NIST and CISA. There's some federal security agencies that also publish security awareness training from phishing and social engineering perspective.
Perfect. Kevin, I think this one's for you. What protection do we have as travel agents when a client rejects charges on his or her credit card, even though all steps were made to prove approval of charges?
So yeah, from that perspective, and I'm assuming that you're being notified via a chargeback or a debit memo from the airline. And again, I think some of that goes back to, in part, what happens with the authorization. Hopefully your acquirer or the airline acquirer is vetting that chargeback to making sure that they've met all those requirements, that it is a valid chargeback. And then about the only thing as an agency in an online world, there is that risk out there. No transactions are 100% guaranteed. You can submit compelling evidence. And I think there's a couple of questions up there a little earlier about, the universal commercial form that was out there for a while. That's really not valid much, but again, taking a picture of an ID or a document signed, or Cornelius, to your point about clicking on accepting terms and conditions, those are all additional pieces of data that you can present with a chargeback in hopes that it would get reversed from an agency perspective. So again, if you're taking all the right steps, you're getting authorization, you're following your internal procedures, your data is protected through various encryption sources, then you're doing everything you can. And unfortunately, chargebacks are a fact of life in the online environment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that under the chargeback management process as well.
Okay, just one more question, Kevin, for you. What is the stance on file authorizations? Should we get a new authorization each and every time a payment needs to be made?
And that's a good point. I mean, we're starting to see more of that with the agencies, and card on file is sort of that process. And I think part of that is working with the GDSs. The way the brands look at it is, as you initially take that card on file, you go ahead and handle that card much like you would an original transaction. Whether you're going to do your 3DS, you're going to do your address verification, you're going to get your CID, whatever those initial processes are, you're going to capture that information and store that on your, your file for future use. And then any subsequent purchases, you should be good, which is passing that card information from your file. Again, part of that is working with the GDSs to make sure they're capturing that. And what we're hearing from the card brands is there's a bigger push now to get better information at the point of sale as to what's happening. Whether that is a card on file transaction, whether that's an original transaction online, whether that's a transaction that may be coming through a agent helping that customer. So again, it comes down to data. But from a on-file authorization, if you get that original authorization, you should be good just to reuse that card in subsequent transactions until the expiration date and or that card changes. And then, of course, you would treat it like a new card and run through that process to get it back on your file.
Okay, thank you. And then into the chargebacks and dispute.
So we talked a little bit about the settlement process, and where the chargeback and dispute comes in is really coming from the agency. From the issuing bank and the cardholders. It's not the card brands. I think we're out there in some communications and we're hearing some things. ARC has a chargeback working group that there may be some agents in this call or on this call that participate in that group. If you want to join, if there's an interest in chargebacks is part of your world, you can email me and I can get you on the list. Sorry for a little bit of a plug, but we meet right now semi-annually. During COVID, we were meeting weekly, then we went to monthly, then we went to quarterly, and really it's a group of airlines and agencies that talk about chargeback-related issues and how we can continue to improve the communication and improve the chargeback process among the participants in the transaction. So from the chargeback perspective, that's really where the chargebacks occurs from the issuer and or cardholder. So if you want to jump to the next slide. Yeah, so from a chargeback management, chargeback perspective, I mean, we could spend probably easily an hour talking about chargebacks. So just really from a high level, the reason we have chargebacks is the Fair Credit Billing Act created back in 1974. We as U.S. consumers love our credit cards, heavily credit cards, and in order to allow us to protect ourselves, the Fair Credit Billing Act was created which then allows the consumer to dispute transactions that they didn't participate in. So from a chargeback perspective, a couple different types. There's a chargeback bank-initiated transaction, and I call this a technical chargeback. And the reason this is a technical chargeback is because this most likely occurs when data gets to, or the transaction gets to the issuing bank, and they look at their internal systems and they identify a flaw in the data that didn't meet the approval code, or there are other data missing. And so they technically can charge this back without any interaction from the customer. And so that may occur. And so again, the challenge there is the customer may not know that this transaction has been charged back. And so if an airline would happen to go ahead and I guess void the ticket or suspend the ticket, or the agency would suspend the ticket, the customer shows up at the airport and they can't travel because that ticket's suspended. So again, that goes back to the importance of making sure you're authorizing those transactions at the time of ticketing through the GDS. And then, of course, we have our other standard ones, that the unauthorized transactions, goods and services not provided, refunds not received, and first-party fraud. So first-party fraud is picked up a little bit. First-party fraud is really where the customer is a good customer in the past and has done good business, but for some reason they're opting not to pay for this transaction. So, that's something a little bit that we have seen on the uptick. From a best practices perspective, of course, awareness is always good of the Billing Act. Again, Chapter 6 of the industry handbook, and reviewing those recommendations there. If you're working with chargebacks, obtaining card brand manuals, making sure that you understand the rules and what's requested for you in that chargeback process. And then, of course, compelling evidence is some of the things we talked about, additional photos of the UUC filings, DocuSign, terms and conditions click. In the case of first-party fraud, maybe some social media pics that you can pull off the internet showing that the individual was in Hawaii when they said they didn't go to Hawaii during the time. So some things you can do along those lines. And then the other thing I just want to call out from a refund not received perspective, be aware of double dipping. So from a double dipping perspective, really what that is the customer will reach out to the agency and or airline and say, hey, I need a refund for some reason. They'll go through the process. A refund may be initiated, but in the meantime, the customers also went out to their bank to create a chargeback. And so those two requests or transactions will cross, and the airline and or agency will give a refund, but then the acquirer will send back a chargeback to the airline that would then be potentially a debit memo to the agency. So you paid out on the refund, and you also get hit with a chargeback. So the double dipping, we saw an increase during COVID as well. So those are some things you just want to be aware of for best practices.
Okay, thank you. And we have the vent. Kevin.
And so just sharing a little bit here about Visa Dispute and Fraud Monitoring Program. I just want to let you know that, of course, all brands have a monitoring program out there. It's just not Visa. Just calling to light Visa a little bit, they made a change in March where they combined several programs out there, monitoring programs out there, into their Visa, their VAMP program is what they're calling it. And really, it's a little bit more of an acquirer focus. They've increased some thresholds. They still have a merchant component to it. So you as a merchant can still be entered into that program. So you want to be aware of that. And then all brands, what we're really starting to see now is there's becoming less tolerance of compliance related issues around fraud and risk. So if you're not doing things properly, not getting authorizations, not doing security checks that you should, not having the multi-factor authentication, a lot of the things that Keith has outlined in place, the brands will start assessing fees and fines to the acquirers. This is an acquirer fee. The acquirers in turn may pass it back to the airline because that's the card brands work with the acquirers, as mentioned earlier. And then those airlines may then turn those fees back to agencies in the form of debit memos. And then of course, if you have your own program as an agent where you are the merchant of record, those fees could potentially come back directly to you. So again, from a fraud monitoring program and from chargebacks, you want to do what you can to keep those volumes low, to help avoid some of those additional potential fees that may come through as a result of that.
Perfect. Kevin, we've got a question. Why can't we, as the agency, control the name as it appears on the charge of the customer credit card statement? Do you have a
good question? Yeah, that's a good question. So you saw the flow a little bit on the front end from an authorization perspective and a settlement perspective. And really what it comes down to is you as an agent and we as ARC, and there's a number, the card issuing bank really owns that real estate on the statement program. So they're the ones that can control what information gets shown on the statement from a name perspective. There's some things that ARC can do. I know from an ARC Pay perspective, there's some ability for us to control sort of the message that goes out there. From a brand perspective, there's different requirements about what data gets passed through. And so, for instance, some corporate card issuers have arrangements with either card brands or third-party data sources that they can supplement that data that is shown on a corporate cardholder statement. So there are some things that can be looked into to see what's the challenge you're trying to address. So happy to talk a little bit offline on that.
Yeah, perfect. So let's look at some resources that are available to you. We've got ARC Risk Check, which we did in collaboration with Perseus, who is a collaborative platform where specific information is shared that identifies chargeback-specific transactions. In that collaborative environment, people have access to score those specific transactions. So if you have a concern in relation to a specific transaction, you can put that information into this environment and it will get scored and give you a risk score, whether or not to accept it or decline that transaction. So it's designed to have a manual interface for sort of the small to mid-size agencies where your transaction volume might be lower, and you want to only review 1 or 2 transactions a day, or lower volume level of transactions. And then of course that also offers an API connection for those if you want to score through or run more transactions through that environment. So that is something that is available to the agency community, and again, it's helping you score those transactions before you really accept them, and it draws on a wide range of industry as well. So all of the data that's included there comes through, not just the travel agency environment, but it also comes in through the airlines and so on. So if someone has seen something along the line of a chargeback or fraudulent chargeback, especially, that information is most likely going to be captured in that space, and you'll have the ability to score a transaction that you might have a concern of. This again is available via our website, so arccorp.com. If you go on the resource, not on the resources, on the products, it's going to be at the bottom of the screen there, and you can select it there and apply or request more information to that environment. In addition to the ARC Risk Check environment, there is other solutions out there through Riskify, Certify, Forta, Count, and Sift. These are all sort of chargeback management tools to help you mitigate against chargeback fraud, etc. And Kevin, you want to add anything else to these solutions?
Yeah, along with that as well, Cornelius, is a lot of those are also risk providers. So they'll also help supplement your risk programs on the front end. So they're sort of full service. They can see the transaction on the front end to help the risk, and then they can also help with chargeback management and solutions on the back end as well. So again, taking a look at your environment, what your appetite for risk is, and each of these service providers have a little bit of a special slant on what they do. So it's definitely worthwhile at least looking into those on the website to see what assistance they can provide for maybe some specific issues you're trying to address.
Perfect. And of course, our website does hold a lot of additional information around, past webinars with a ton of information there as well, and then additional guidance in relation to that Section B requirements, again, the reasonable care as well that we discussed. Those 10 points there are extracted, and you get into more detail as well. So yeah, at our website, you can find more information in that space also. And then just for awareness, there's some reporting of incidents, and I'm going to hand over to Keith here to give you a quick rundown of what's available.
Yeah, so one of the asks we've had is to provide a list of parties of who to contact in regards to breach reporting, right? So this is a list of recommended parties to reach out to if you are impacted by a breach, starting with the GDS first, to cut off any further fraudulent transactions, and then on to ARC, to continue to cut off, and then law enforcement, right? So there's a number of agencies listed here, Secret Service, FBI, as well as Cywatch. We recognize that not everyone is going to respond from an agency perspective, but we do encourage further reporting, right? Because the more reporting there are, the more likelihood that we're going to get a response. But for certain, your local law enforcement, because you are going to want a copy and documentation of a report of the incident for either insurance purposes or reporting to the GDS and ARC as well.
Correct, absolutely. And the more complaints, especially IC3, the more complaints they receive on a similar topic, the more likely they are to actually pick up that case, because it all goes by dollars. So the higher the dollar amount is that's being reported in as being fraudulent, the more likely they are to go after it. And it doesn't have to be a single individual with a high dollar value. It's an accumulation of people reporting it in that builds that number up to a certain value or threshold that they have that will drive them to do that. So again, the recommendation is to always report any cyber breaches or fraud that you might have encountered through these channels, and ultimately I'll get to hopefully take down the fraudsters. All right, looking to move on to more Q&A. I know we're close to time. Oh, we're actually over time, but if there's any additional questions that anybody has, please go ahead and put them in the question section and we'll get to them. Otherwise, Judy, anything else from your end?
No, I just wanted to remind everybody that, again, this is recorded. That question has been asked a couple of times. Cornelius, this is a question for you and team, Kevin and Keith. Can the deck be shared independently of the recording, or will we just share the recording with the deck included in the presentation?
Just the recording would be preferred.
Okay, perfect. So those of you that asked, and I think I answered it correctly, then the PowerPoint will be included in the recording, which will be available. Give us a couple of days and it will be on arccorp.com on webinars on demand. Otherwise, email me and I'll be happy to send a link when it's available in the next few days as well. Okay, so thank you. Thanks, Cornelius.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep, thanks everyone for attending.